What's up, guys? Welcome to Fix It Retro. My name is Austin. So Fix It Retro is a brand new channel that I've just created. I created this channel for a handful of reasons. Some things that I'm most excited about is my love for retro gaming and my love for the preservation of retro gaming. Another thing is my love for modding. I did my first PlayStation 1 mod chip when I was probably around 12 or 13 years old. It was a very, very shoddy job, but it worked. And I actually did it to mine. I did it to a couple of buddy systems so we could run our backups on that. And then I tried to test my luck with modding the PlayStation 2, and I don't know how much you know about modding the PlayStation 2, but it was a very difficult process. So I got a PlayStation 2, tried to mod it, ruined it, bridged a bunch of points together, then returned it and got another one and ruined that one, and then returned it and got a third one. And then I thought to myself, I'm not cut out for this. I don't have the skills. The good news is I've come a long way since then. I've been able to fine tune a lot of skills with modding and soldering and things like that. So, which brings me to kind of my next point to why I wanted to create this channel, and that is my love for old consoles, especially old consoles that can be modded or repaired, or things that are breaking that we can kind of give a second life to. So, and then my final point is my love to share what I do with the community. When I do these things, I'm always looking for people to help out or share or learn the way that I learned over the years. So watching YouTube videos, or really that's about it. I've learned a lot of stuff from trial and error over the years. I've learned a lot of stuff from YouTube videos, various techniques and stuff. So hopefully my goal with this channel is somebody can watch this video and they can say, oh, well, I saw Austin do this when he was modding a Dreamcast, or when he was modding a Nintendo 64, or whatever it might be. So my goal with that is to, when you're watching my videos, you might learn a thing or two, and then with that information you can go and do your own modifications and hopefully be successful in that and not ruin 2 different PlayStation 2s. And then some. That's not the only console I've ruined, but I've certainly got a lot better over the years. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get started. Let's talk about what we're actually going to be working on today. So what we're going to be doing today is installing a DCDigital HW2, which I believe is hardware 2, probably hardware revision 2. That's strictly a guess. I actually have no idea. I got what I think might actually be the last DCDigital. Now, I could be completely wrong on this. This is purely speculation, okay, guys? But I got this DCDigital delivered a couple days ago, and I got an email shortly after saying that the DCDigitals have officially sold out and that they're eventually going to move on to the Retro Gym, which is pretty cool. Kind of excited about that, actually. Retro Gym for DC. I've been asking about that, wondering when that's going to come out, trying to do research. And from what I gather, they're basically waiting for all the DCDigitals to sell before they release the Retro Gym for the Dreamcast. So I got an email from PixelFX saying that PixelFX. That's, I don't know why that's so difficult for me to say. PixelFX saying that they were officially sold out. So, guys, I might just hang on to this thing. This thing might be worth money someday. Like, you know, like, hey, where'd that last DCDigital go? Well, I bought it. I have it. It's right here. Okay? I'm just kidding. So today we're going to be installing this thing into this black Dreamcast right over here. Now, this is a Dreamcast that I got, and I did end up putting it in an aftermarket case. However, I liked the white buttons, so I did keep the white buttons on there. And this just still has a regular GD-ROM drive in it, which actually works just fine. Maybe down the line I'll eventually replace it with a GD-MU or something, or a mode, but for now I'm just going to keep the GD-ROM in there. We're just going to drop this DCDigital in there. Now, if you're not familiar with a DCDigital, right here, we'll just go ahead and open this pack. Now, the DCDigital has a couple of various parts that are with it, so we'll just open this here. We'll take a look at exactly what's in here. Oh, that's really stuck. All right. And that's it. That's everything. Okay, so first thing, this was just on the top, so we'll go over this first. This is actually the Wi-Fi antenna. So the DCDigital does have Wi-Fi capability, so you can do you can do firmware updates with it. You might be able to do some other cool stuff. I'm not actually, I haven't tried any of that. I know that it does the firmware updates, which is fantastic. But anyway, this here is just a little sticker that actually sticks on the back of the DCDigital, because it actually sets on the, and we'll get to this later on in the installation, but it sets on at the very, very bottom of the console, and it actually sits on one of the very, very thin RF shielding. So this thing here is just a nice little buffer, a nice little insulator between that and the shielding. So again, we'll get to that later on in the installation. This thing here is actually the cutout. So if you're not familiar with the DCDigital, or you're not familiar with how the installation works, no worries. That's why you're here. We're going to go over that. But this thing here, it's a little guide to assist you with drilling the holes to actually install the HDMI port itself into the Dreamcast. So I've got a Dreamcast here that I already have a DCDigital installed. So here in just a second, I'm gonna pull it out up and show you all what that looks like. So, and then right in here, this, I believe it's a little money envelope. These are our ribbon cables. So we've got this first one here. And this is the actual cable that will attach to the audio chip as well as the graphical chip of the Dreamcast. We'll get to all of this here very soon, but this is really the beefy part of the install. And then we have this one here, which is actually the controller sequence that actually brings up the on-screen display. This is what's going to allow you to do that by pushing those buttons to make that happen. So let's just tuck those right back in there for now. We don't need them right now. Anyway, let me show you guys a Dreamcast that already has a DCDigital installed. So this is my personal Dreamcast here that I wanted to show you all. And so this here on the back, you can actually see right here exactly how that thing gets installed. So you can see it actually just we cut a little hole in the bottom underneath these vents here. And that's what that guide actually assists us in doing. So if we just take one of these guides that I've just used in the past and we just clip it on here just like this. Whoa. And as you can see, it actually lines up holes, and you just use a drill your holes in there, and then from there you can use a file, as well as I use an X-Acto knife a lot, and you can kind of carve that out to get it to the exact size you need it to be. And then from that point on, you're smooth sailing. That's aside from the soldering, that's actually really one of the most difficult parts. Is just, it's not even difficult, it's just time consuming and very tedious. So, but once that's done, it's like a weight off your shoulders. And then you have this little tiny hole, which is actually for a reset button for the DCDigital. So that's what that's for. Okay, so now that we got the kind of the introduction out of the way, let's go ahead and get cracking with disassembling this thing here. So we just flip it over. The Dreamcast just uses let's actually pop this thing off. This actually uses 4 Phillips head screws. So you just need really just a Phillips head screwdriver, which makes it pretty simple to disassemble. You do have to take off the modem in order to get to this screw right over here. And we'll start backing these screws out, and hopefully my camera stays in focus the entire time. Alright, so we've got all those screws backed out. Let's go ahead and lift the top off of this thing. I think what I'm going to do is actually take the power supply out first. So the first thing we want to do is unplug that, and then we'll back out these screws. Exactly 2 screws we're going to back out. You'll notice a difference in screws. Some of them are black, some of them are silver, or this gold here. So just kind of take note of what screws are going where, just because when you do go to reassemble the console, you are going to want to make sure that you put all the screws in the correct spot, just because they are different sizes. So this part here, you're just going to want to put your finger under here, and then you can just pop it straight up, just like that. And again, just be careful with handling this thing. You don't know if they have a charge or if they're holding a charge, so just be careful handling the power supply. You don't want to get a little zap. We are going to go ahead and take off this power switch here. Okay, set the screws aside. Next, let's go ahead and remove the GD-ROM. So we've got 3 screws. We've got one here, and one here. Okay, so similar to how the power supply lifts off when you have to put your finger under it and pry it, you have to do kind of a similar technique with the GD-ROM. So the GD-ROM, if you're not familiar, it actually plugs into the main board right underneath this metal casing here. So what I usually do is I'll take my finger and tuck it down in here, and then I'll kind of pry up just like that. And what that does is just allows these 2 connectors here to disconnect from one another, and we can take this and set it aside. So just set that right up there for now. Alright, awesome. And next thing we're going to do is take out the fan as well as the controller port panel. So to do that, I'm actually going to get a slightly smaller screwdriver here. I'll have to fish those screws out in a minute. So we should be able to go ahead and lift this out. This is a separate piece here, but we should be able to grab the board here and just kind of separate it from that. Just like that. Perfect. And then we'll also lift the fan out with it. Oh, forgot to unplug the ribbon cable here. Alright, so we've got that cable unplugged. We can set it aside for now. The next thing to do is we've got these screws here. So we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This one here we're actually not going to use, and I'll explain why. That screw I left out when I did a case change on this particular Dreamcast. This screw will not be used going forward. So your Dreamcast, if you're taking it apart for the very first time, probably has a screw here. Just know that it will not have a screw going forward after the DCDigital install. And then of course one other screw right down here. Let's go ahead and back these up. And this last one over here is one of those silver / gold / brass color. I'm not sure what color that is. One of those different screws. The other ones are the black screws that go around, at least they should be. And then I believe this one is also one of the silver screws. So silver screw, and then the rest of these should be black screws if I remember correctly. What we're gonna do now is go ahead and grab it from underneath, just like this. And I usually grab this part first towards the controller ports. That way we can, once we get to this part, we can then kind of wedge it out from underneath the actual sockets of the AV port as well as the serial port in the back there. You know, actually, let's try to leave that metal shielding down below. There we go. Okay, so we've got that out. That's the main board attached to that. And then we have this metal shielding here. So guys, a couple small little tips on this metal shielding here. These little pads here, your Dreamcast should have these. If not, you need to make sure you add them. These are actually thermal pads, so they're helping to wick the heat away and disperse it around this shield. So again, these are important. You want to make sure you maintain these, keep these here in place. If they're not there, again, you are going to want to replace them. Okay. So just a couple things to keep in mind here when doing this. When I purchased this case, I actually already made the modifications because I knew I was going to install a DCDigital. So that, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show on camera, but I am going to walk you through exactly what it is that I did. So what I did is this little peg, it's not even a peg that sticks up, it's almost like a little bump that sticks up, and it seems to be maybe from like the mold. Actually, here's one right here. So it looks just like this. Get better light there. It's like this tiny little, maybe 1.5 millimeter thing, bump that sticks up. There was one right here, which you just get some flush cutters and you actually just trim that off. So I just took these and I just like this and just cut it off. Only I did it right here. The reason you do that is because this is actually where the board for the DCDigital sits. So it sits right here, and then actually it sits on that metal shroud, which then sits on this. But when you're actually bolting the DCDigital down, you're going to notice that little lump there gets in the way, so you want to make sure you get that cut off and make it nice and flush with the rest of it. Another thing is this screw post right over here. Again, just take a pair of flush cutters and just cut that out of the way, make sure it's nice and flush. Let's set this thing aside for now. Alright, so we should be able to lift this off. There should be no more screws holding this on. And again, we have thermal pad here, as well as a thermal pad that is typically here, but this particular one just stuck to the board, which is fine, it's not a big deal. And then again, this thermal pad, when we connect it back, will connect to this chip right here. So just to keep those in mind, again, if they're not there, or if they're damaged or ripped or anything like that, you do want to make sure you replace them. You can get them pretty cheap on Amazon or eBay. All right, guys, so what we're going to do now is we're going to set the board aside. So we're going to set this aside for now. We're going to get to that in just a second. What we're actually going to do now is we're going to modify these two pieces here. So there's a couple slight modifications that we have to do. You are going to need either some flush cutters, or you're going to need something that will actually cut through these. I've used these before. I also have some smaller ones. I've used these before, so just something that is going to enable you to actually cut through this slightly thicker metal of this one. And this one actually here is pretty thin metal. This one I've actually used some hefty scissors for. We just do a little cut here and we cut this piece here off. Okay, cool, let's get started. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is we're actually going to do the modifications to this one first. What I'm going to go ahead and do is, because these have the tendency to fall off, I'm just going to peel these off and place them just in the bottom of the shell. Important thing is to just not forget to put them back on whenever we're finished here. But we'll set the shell aside for now. We're going to use that in just a minute. But what we're going to do now, and you can do this any way that is easy for you, is we're going to go ahead and do modifications to this bottom shielding here. So a couple of the modifications that we're going to do is we're actually just going to cut, and there's a little crease here, but we're going to cut this section right here, excuse me, this section here, as well as this section right here. Again, guys, I've said I've used scissors to do this before. I'm actually going to try to do it just a little differently. We're going to see if these here actually make it any easier. And so far, I'm going to say that answer is no, because I don't think they're doing much of anything. Oh, you know what? I'm kind of doing a little grab and then pull to disconnect it, and that does seem to be working. Maybe I'll use the bigger ones. I'll try these. Let's bend this out some. Oh, actually I don't like that. It's bending a little too much. Woo. Okay, so we've got that done. Another thing I might do is actually take it out in the garage and just kind of take a hammer to it to just flatten this all back down, put it on maybe the concrete, and just kind of tap it with a hammer pretty lightly just to flatten that all back down. Now, this is going to be a little sharp right now, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. So then now the next piece we're going to cut off is this piece right here, which hopefully should be a little bit easier just because it's a much smaller piece to cover. So we'll just snip that, bend it downward. Okay, great. So we've got both of these pieces off. This piece is actually done. Again, I am going to just take it out in the garage, just tap it down so it's nice and flat. Kind of hopefully eliminate some of those jagged edges on it a little bit. But I'll do that here in a second off camera. Set that off to the side. And now we do have this piece here. Now this one here is a little more difficult just because the metal is a lot thicker. I am going to use the bigger ones for this, so I'm going to use these guys. But what we're going to cut is right over here, and this is how you can actually kind of tell this. So we have the AV ports here. Well, typically the AV ports are here. So the AV port and the serial ports are here. This is where your modem port is going to be, and then this is the section that we're actually going to cut off. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to take these, and I'm going to do a cut right here. Nice. Okay, so this should actually bend down like that. Now, what we can do actually is get some pliers. We can grab a hold of it, and probably regular pliers might be better than needle nose, but we can just take it and bend it back and forth until it actually just breaks off itself, like that. Okay, easy enough. So this little tab here also needs to come off. So again, we'll just take our pliers, and we should just be able to bend this back and forth. Perfect. All right, so it should look like that when you're done, when it's all said and done. Okay guys, well that's done. We've got both of our pieces modded, both of our metal shielding. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this little tiny jig here that actually comes with the DCDigital. So we're actually going to use this thing to drill the hole that will prep us for the HDMI slot. So that's going to go right here on the bottom. And what you do is you actually take this. We're going to do this side first with the 3 holes. And so this jig actually has these little holes, so it does fit perfectly in with the vents of the Dreamcast. Okay. Now what you want to do in the beginning is you're going to do about 1, 2, 3 slots, and you can see just a little bit of that one. That is exactly where you're going to want it to start out. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to hold it there just like that, and we're going to put our drill here. I'm going to try to keep this on camera, and we're just going to drill our holes. Okay, so once we've got those first 3 holes drilled, what we're going to do is go ahead and flip it. So we have the 2 holes here now on the bottom. And when we flip it, you're actually going to see basically the first 4 holes of the vents for the Dreamcast. So you should see the first 4 slots. Again, hold it in place. Okay. Now, what I'm actually going to do here is I do want that reset port to be right over here, like I showed you on the white Dreamcast initially. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and switch my drill bit over to this slightly smaller one. So the drill bit that I'm putting on now is a 1.5 millimeter drill bit. The drill bit that I actually did the holes with initially, that was a 2.5 millimeter drill bit, just so you can take note of that. And then right here, we're actually just going to put this right back where it was, again, and right where we started. We've got the 3 slots that we can see, and just a little bit of that 4th slot. I'm going to hold it in place here, and this is when I'm going to go ahead and drill for the reset button, reset hole here. Try to get all those shavings out of there. Okay, so we've got the start of our HDMI port here. We've got the hole for our reset button. Now what we're going to do is just go ahead and we're going to use an X-Acto knife, and we're just going to start to try to cut that out and get that nice and cleaned up and shaped out for our HDMI port. Okay, so we can actually test our hole cutting skills right now. What we're going to do first is we're actually just going to take the board. We're going to go ahead and unpackage it from here. So with the DCDigital PCB, we're going to need to cut this. Okay, now before we do anything else, we are going to want to put our sticker on the back. So this is the sticker that, again, actually just fits perfectly on the back of this thing. So we'll peel it off, and then we'll very carefully place it on the back because, again, the DCDigital PCB does sit on the metal shroud. So we just want to make sure we put this on there to avoid any chances of it shorting anywhere. This might be the most difficult sticker I've ever tried to peel, which is great that it's doing this because I'm like on camera trying to do it. This makes me all giddy. It just makes me really happy that it's being as difficult as it's being. I'm just like, yes, so glad you're doing this. Is it like not cut? Like it's supposed to be cut. Okay, you know what? Whatever. There, see, it's supposed to be kind of perforated like that, but that end is not. So we will just very carefully line this up. That looks pretty good. Alright, cool. It's funny because this end that is, again, supposed to be perforated is like stuck on there, but I don't think it matters. It might hang over just a little bit, but it shouldn't matter. These contacts here aren't actually used for anything, at least in the Dreamcast they're not. We're really just going to use these 2 contacts right here. So, it shouldn't be an issue. Alright, so let's go ahead and try and put this thing in place. So what we're going to do is just use this shroud that we modified earlier. We'll go ahead and set it down in here as if we're going to put it all back together. Then we're just going to take our DCDigital and just try to fit it up in there. So we'll just turn it and see if it actually goes in through the slot that we're cutting. Now I'll tell you right now that this is a bit of a tedious process. So again, it's not fitting right now, so we are going to have to just continue to do it. I might have, in between doing this and filing this hole out, I might actually might test it out 20 times before I actually finally get it correctly. So we're just going to continue filing for now. All right, let's give that a shot. Oh, I think we've got something. We have got something. Look at that. Nice. All right, so that is a pretty good fit right there. Now, just to double check it, we're gonna go ahead and put back in the metal shielding. Just set that in there. Make sure it still fits with this in there. Okay. Nice. It does. All right, so now what we do is we actually need to mount, and we use these tiny little bolts. We're actually gonna screw holes and mount the PCB to the Dreamcast shell. So we actually take the drill holes right here, and we drill a hole right here. Then we use the tiny little bolts to go ahead and mount it to the shell. That way it doesn't move when you're plugging your HDMI cables in and out. So I'm going to change the bit on my drill, and we're going to go ahead and get to that now. Okay, so I've got it set up and ready to get the holes drilled so we can actually mount the DCDigital PCB to the actual bottom of this Dreamcast shell. What I do have is I've got a little piece of wood here, because again, you do actually drill completely through the metal shielding and through the bottom of the Dreamcast shell to run these bolts through. And I don't want to drill into my desk, so what I'm going to do, and this is a 2mm bit here that I'm going to use, is I'm just going to hold the DCDigital in place. So I'm going to hold it, make sure I'm getting a nice, make sure I'm lining it up nicely with the hole that we cut into the bottom of the shell. I'm just going to hold it tight in place, and then I'm just going to take my drill, and you just kind of use the PCB as a guide, and I'm just going to drill straight through the shielding as well as the bottom of the Dreamcast shell. I'm going to do it right over here as well. Okay. Now we can take this off. We're just going to dust it off a little bit. Alright, I'm just going to take this out, and I'm just going to kind of blow it off, get all that, there are now little chips of wood in there, and there's little bits of metal from drilling through the shielding, as well as plastic from drilling through the bottom of the case. So I'm just going to take this and just kind of give it a nice little cleaning. Okay guys, so now what we're going to do is I've got the shell all cleaned out, I've got all that, all the shavings from the drilling out. So now we're going to go ahead and mount the actual PCB for the DCDigital. So we're just going to put that in, and then we're going to line it up with the holes that we drilled. And we have the DCDigital kit actually comes with these little tiny screws and these little nuts that will actually attach it to the bottom of the shell. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just feed these up through the bottom. So we'll flip this over. I'm just going to hold this in place and flip it over. Oh, I missed some shavings there. And we'll feed it through the bottom of the shell, and you can see it right there. And we'll take these little nuts and put them on. There we go. That's pretty good. Alright, so we've got this screw in here, and now we're just going to go ahead and move over to this one. So we'll just feed it through the back here. And you can see it coming through right there. So now we've got that thing all installed, and now we are ready to set this part here aside, and then we're going to move on to soldering the actual main board. Actually, one more thing before we do that, let's go ahead and attach the antenna. We're going to go ahead and do it now just to get it out of the way, and we don't want to forget about it later. So here's the antenna for the Wi-Fi, so we're just going to pull off this little protective end here. And we're just going to snap it right in this area here. There we go. And this is ultimately going to feed up to this area, and we'll attach it probably right there above the modem. So right there in that area is eventually what it's going to look like, but we don't have to worry about right this second. So let's set this aside. We'll go ahead and switch over to the main board, and then we will get soldering on all of that. Okay guys, so we've got the main board here in front of us. The first thing we need to do is we're actually going to remove a couple of resistors here. So we're going to be removing R609, this one here, and R610, this one right here. So both of those resistors need to come off. So I'll just add a little bit of solder here. Okay, so both of those are off, but what we are going to do is actually just clean that up just a little bit with some solder wipe. We want to get rid of all that excess solder there. Alright, so now that we've got that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and actually... One thing that I'm going to do that sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I'm going to do it this time around, is I'm actually going to pre-tin these connections here on the ribbon. So I'm just going to add just a little bit of solder to all these connectors here, and then I'm going to add some solder to all of these contact points right up here too as well. So this one actually connects to the audio chip, and this one connects to the video chip. So we can grab that signal as it's coming out of both chips. Okay, cool. So let's just go ahead and actually add, I'm just going to turn this a little bit. Let's put it right here. I'm just going to add just a little bit of flux to that. Then I'm just going to add some solder to my iron. It's actually a little bit more than what I'd wanted. Let's take some of that off. That'll do. And then we're just going to kind of drag it across here. And it's okay if we get just a little too much right now, we'll be able to pull it off. Again, I added just a little more than what I had actually wanted. So if you guys are doing this and you put too much solder on, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world if you bridge points. You can see me here kind of correcting it when I put too much solder on. So just really going to want to use a good amount of flux. Flux is going to be your best friend with that. And then you're just going to kind of go down the line and move the solder, and it'll kind of grip onto your iron. And then that's going to enable us to actually separate those bridges that are there. So let's just see if I can get a little closer in this, and that'll help us determine whether or not there are any. I'll probably also look at this under a microscope as well, just to make sure there are no bridges. Right here, very roughly looking at it, there could possibly be some, but it's okay. I'll be able to fix that once we get it on the actual board. But yeah, we'll leave that there for now. I just wanted to tin it up a little bit, and then, like I said, if we need to, we can always fix that once we get it on the board. So now we're just going to tin these little spots up here. Slide that down just a bit. I'll throw just a little bit of flux on. Okay. And just for the sake of my right hand doing all this, we're just going to rotate this just a little bit. And we're going to do the same thing right here with these contacts. Let's actually throw on just a little more flux. I think the soldering iron being in the frame is kind of throwing the camera off a little bit. It's focusing on the soldering iron rather than
focusing on what I want it to focus on. There we go. I'm actually going to put just a little more on there. Okay, so that should be good for now. Again, once we get it on the board, we'll be able to do a little bit closer look under a microscope and just see if we've got any... Alright, there we go. That was a close one. Alright, so now once we get it on the board, we'll be able to actually look at it under a microscope, and from there we can determine whether or not there are any bridges that we need to connect or anything like that. So it should be overall a pretty simple fix. So let's go back to the main board now, and there are a couple places on there that we need to tin real quick. So we'll do that. One of them is this capacitor leg right here. So we're actually going to attach it right over here to the negative of this capacitor leg. So let's actually do that real quick right now. We're just going to add just a little bit of fresh solder to it. That'll work, and then once we put that ribbon cable on, it will help us a bit. Okay, so we're just going to lay this down into place. Now again, we just want to make sure that everything is lining up the way we want it to. This part is obviously super important. So we're just going to line it up with the video one first really quick. And then once that's done... Well guys, I apologize. I didn't realize that my camera looking at the board was not recording that entire thing. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of rundown of what I actually did here. So I was able to solder in some of these joints here, like these smaller joints here, as well as these smaller ones that are bridging this to this pad here on the board, as well as this guy here. So as well as the one that is on down here. Now these solder joints I'm not entirely satisfied with. What I'm going to do is actually look at them underneath the microscope, especially all of the chips up here. The soldering job looks pretty sloppy on camera, so again I just want to double check it all and see how it looks under a scope. And then again, I'm just going to double check really all of these solder joints just to make sure they look good. Microscope's always good to have when you're doing some super fine soldering like this, and we'll come back when I'm done with that. We're gonna, once we get back after that, we're gonna do a continuity test just to kind of double check our work. Okay guys, so I was actually able to get a pretty good view of it under a microscope, and I was able to do a little bit of work on some of the solder joints that I wasn't too happy with. So there were a couple of them that were just a little sloppy. They probably would have been fine, they would have done the trick, but a lot of them just kind of looked sloppy, and I just wasn't happy with that kind of work. So these I was actually able to clean up a bunch right along here. I was able to clean this up, really clean up most of them, add a little more solder to this point here, and I was definitely able to clean these up. There were a few of these that were actually bridged. This is the first one that I did, so I actually put just a little too much solder on that, but I was able to clean it up. It all turned out just fine. So now what we're going to do is just do a continuity test. So let me grab my multimeter here. And what a continuity test is, if you're not familiar, is we're just going to actually check all the connections and make sure there are no bridges and all the connections actually go exactly to where they need to go. So I'm going to turn on my multimeter here and turn it to the continuity mode. And what'll happen is when we actually find continuity, we're going to hear that thing beep at us, and that's how we know whether or not it's a good joint or a bad joint. I'm just going to go through and get this done. That should all be okay. Cool. Let's actually go up here and we'll just check this one. Soldering job is just a little sloppier on this one. I'm not typically happy with that, but it does. There were no bridging, so I'm gonna just kind of go with it for the installation video, but typically I'm gonna want something just a little cleaner than this. Position this. I want to make sure I'm getting good contacts here. Okay, let's clean this up with just a little bit of IPA. Alright guys, that looks pretty good. We're going to leave that for now. I think all the connections seem to be good. The solder joints overall aren't too bad. These actually turned out pretty clean. These up here, they'll do the job. It's not the prettiest job, but we're gonna leave it like that for now. And then, like I said, it's kind of just cosmetic to me. It just looks kind of sloppy, but overall I think it'll hold just fine. So, okay guys, so we've got the board flipped over now. The last and final thing that we need to solder on is the controller flex cable. So the DCDigital does have an on-screen interface that you can pull up really at any time the Dreamcast is on. So it's just a series of button combinations that you push on the controller, and it brings up the on-screen display. And with that, you can do a lot of things. You can set different filters or scan lines. You can do the in-game reset. You can pair it up with your mode and do the mode action button or the disc swap button. So there's some pretty cool stuff you can do with the on-screen display for the DCDigital. Now, in order to do that, we have to solder on this controller flex. That way the console knows what to do and you press this series of buttons. So what we're looking at right now, we just have this little tiny flex cable here. And the couple points that we're looking at a couple of them right up here. So we're looking at R601. So we're going to tack one little contact right there. And then R602, we're going to tack another contact right there. So let's get started on that. Alright, so let's do that. That looks pretty good right there. Let's go ahead and apply just a little bit of flux. A little bit of flux. And we can just tack it down. Add just a little more. A little bit of flux, and you can just tack it down. Okay, that looks, yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, that'll do just fine. Alright, so now here's the part where we're going to have to just bend this flex ribbon just a little bit, and you want to do this very carefully, very gently. Zoom my camera out here, it's freaking out on me. There we go, okay. So we were up here, now we're actually going to go to this little space right about here, and this space encompasses our next two contact points. So we're just going to take this ribbon cable here, and we're just going to bring it down this way. We're just going to do a very small little bend. We're not going to crease it, we're just going to do a little bend in it. And then this will actually connect to this tantalum capacitor right here. So again, let's just do just a little bit of flux there. That is, I don't know what I was thinking. That is way too much solder. Let's get a little bit of that out of there. Alright, so the final contact is actually this little guy right here. Is that on camera okay? Let's move it up just a little bit. Yeah, so this one right here, right next to where it says IC206, which this is not IC206, that's this guy. But right here is where we're going to be tacking this on. So again, we're just going to do a little bend. We're not going to do a fold, we're just going to do a little bend on the cable. A little bit of flux. Okay. Let me just kind of reposition this cable here, get the proper bend that we want. See if I can make this joint just a little prettier here. Oh no, or let me just see if I can just rip it off completely. That's good. Okay. Alright, that'll do. If you look right here, you'll see on this cable this little white line that's right here. That just kind of indicates exactly where you want to create another little bend. So we're just going to take this and bend it this way. Because what's going to happen is this is now going to go and plug into the actual PCB of the DC-Digital itself. And if you don't do this bend, guys, this particular bend, you do risk damaging this ribbon cable, this little flex cable. I've had my first DC-Digital install a while. It's been a while now, but I didn't do this bend, and then when I opened that Dreamcast back up, I noticed I really kind of crushed this flex cable, and it still worked fine. It wasn't really a huge deal. I was just able to kind of redo the bend, or actually do the bend in the first place, and then I was able to kind of remedy it, but the cable just did not look good. It was just a little crushed, a little more than what I would like for it to be, so just make sure you do that bend there. Alright, cool. So let me get the bottom tray of the console, the bottom shell, and we're going to throw this together as much as we can before we actually, in order to actually test it. So you do have to basically put the majority of the console together to test it, just because of that's just kind of how that's how Sega set it up. You pretty much have to have a GD-ROM connected, you have to have the controller ports connected with the fan, so you really have to kind of put the console together nearly completely in order to test this. So I'm going to get cracking on that. Alright guys, so I've got the motherboard back and ready to go and ready to connect to the actual PCB of the DC-Digital. So I've got the bottom shell here ready to go. I've actually already made the connections here, so as you can see, you just lift up these little tabs here, pop the ribbon cable in, make sure it's nice and straight, and then snap that tab back down. You're going to do that to both of them, both the main flex cable as well as the actual controller flex cable. So once we've got that in there, that's when we're going to very carefully just turn this back down, and you can just kind of peek underneath to make sure that the flex cables are kind of falling to wherever it is that they need to fall, so they're not crushing one another, or the board's not crushing the flex cable or anything like that. So alright, so we've kind of got that thing pressed down in there. Now we can just continue to assemble it, put this thing together, and then we will test it. Alright, so we'll just go through. Really quick, before we put this piece on, a couple things I want to point out. First and foremost, I went ahead and added some Kapton tape right here. Again, these edges here, just because that's where we cut, these edges here are actually just a little abrasive, and that's going to be potentially rubbing up against that flex cable there. So this might be something that, maybe only I do. It might be something that's completely unnecessary. I don't know. One thing's for sure is it makes me feel better doing it, just in case, again, we're not rubbing that flex cable up against these abrasive edges and potentially causing a short or anything like that, or worse, damaging our flex cable, and then we've got to worry about trying to get another one of those. So we're going to be extra careful, pay extra attention when we're putting this on. We just want to make sure we're keeping an eye on this antenna cable here, which I have already connected. I just peeled the adhesive off and went ahead and put it on the top of where the modem sits. But again, just be careful with putting this metal shielding into place so you're not pinching that wire or anything, and this thing should sit nice down on top of that. So once that's there, then we can actually go ahead and put these screws in. And again, just keep in mind, it is not the long silver screw. You should have exactly 4 longer silver screws. And just a reminder that those go to the controller port, nothing else. All right, awesome, guys. So what I'm thinking now, before we put any more screws into place, let's just piece this thing together enough and we can go ahead and plug it in and actually test it. So a couple things with the Dreamcast is, you do have to pretty much assemble nearly the entire console in order to actually test it. And what I mean by that is, the way this thing is configured is, it does require the fan. Of all things, it actually knows when the fan is not there and the fan is not plugged in, and because of that, when you go to boot it and the fan is not present, you're more than likely just going to get a black screen. So it doesn't really help you if you're trying to test your brand new DCDigital and all you see is a black screen. So you're going to think there's something wrong with your installation when really you just didn't put the fan in. So again, make sure you do hook that fan up. Very, very important, especially when it comes to actually testing your console. Plug that ribbon cable in there. Sorry guys, I keep using like ribbon cable and flex cable interchangeably, and you know, maybe they are interchangeable. I'm not entirely sure. I don't pretend to know everything, but all right, we'll set that here. And we have our power supply with our power switch already attached. There we go. Okay. All right, and the last thing that we need to add on is, of course, the GD-ROM. Another thing that the console will not boot is if the GD-ROM is not hooked up. So, again, you're probably just going to get a black screen if you try to boot it without a GD-ROM. So let's go ahead and slide this thing into place. And you will kind of be able to feel that click. You'll be able to feel that push down when you do go to actually push that down into place. That way you know it's plugged in and connected to the main board underneath. Okay guys, well we're pretty much here. I'm going to go ahead and hook this thing up to my capture card as well as the TV and the power, and we're going to test this thing and we're going to see, make sure everything works okay, and if it does, we'll piece it all back together. We'll pretty much be good to go. Alright dudes, so we are all hooked up here and ready to go. I've got the power hooked up and the HDMI cable. One thing I don't know if I mentioned, that the HDMI port, it is a mini HDMI port, so normal HDMI cables will not work with that without either an adapter, or you can get a mini HDMI to HDMI cable. It's just the same thing, it's the exact same connection, exact same signal. It's just the mini HDMI connectors are just a tad bit smaller. Would I like to have a full-size HDMI port in this thing? Absolutely, I think that'd be awesome. But I think, unfortunately, we're limited by the amount of space that we have in the case to make something like that happen. So I've got my mini HDMI cable plugged into the back of it, which actually goes to my capture card and then into the TV as well as my computer. So another thing is I could not for the life of me find my actual real disc of Resident Evil Code Veronica. I think it's in a closet over in one of the other rooms, but I was able to get a backup, so I do have the backup of it. So I'm just going to pop it in here. This is the first disc, and I have to test the Resident Evil game because they're my favorite games of all time. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started on this. We're going to power this console on. Everybody cross your fingers. This is the best part. This is my favorite part about doing these projects, is testing them at the end. Let's go ahead and get this going. Here we go. There we go. Very nice. Awesome. Okay, cool. So the disc is reading fine. As you can see, the GD-ROM drive works fantastically in this one, which is nice because it's so easy to find consoles now with bad GD-ROM drives in them, and so, you know, people have to throw either like a GDMU inside those things or a mode, but it's always nice when you have just like a kind of a plain Jane console, HDMI port, and then just a normal GD-ROM drive. So with this game, already I can tell it's looking fantastic on here. Oh, this looks great. This looks so good. I always forget when I'm out here in my little workshop and I test these consoles, I usually test them with AV cables, but you know, whenever I do one of these mods, testing them is always like you're always like, wow, it looks a lot sharper, it looks a lot clearer. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start a new game, and then we're going to run the self-test. So let's do new game, and we'll let that load up here. So just a little bit about the on-screen display. So one thing, there is a sequence of buttons that you'll push on the controller, which will bring up the on-screen display. So those buttons are left trigger, right on the D-pad, and then press the B button. And you'll see right there it popped up. We have our on-screen display, and then you'll see in the bottom of the screen, we're running at 1080p on this particular screen. This will go up to 1440p if you have a 1440p display. The TV that I'm using right now is just an older TV that I use for testing consoles and stuff, so this thing's only going to go up to 1080p. Anyway, but you'll see at the bottom, right above where it says the resolution, you'll see where it says L for exit and R for select. So it's referring to the trigger buttons on the back, so those are really going to be your select, whatever option you're navigating to, or to go back, you'll hit the left trigger to go back. So for example here, we'll just use the D-pad to scroll up and down, and then we want to select system, so we'll select the right trigger, and then we're going to go down to debug/self-test, and we're just going to, this will give us an idea on whether or not everything's soldered correctly, and if it's not, it'll let us know which pins are not soldered correctly. And we've got all hearts, so all hearts is a good thing. All hearts means all the pins are soldered correctly, and if we want to, we can run that test again down at the bottom where it says R for reset test. We'll go ahead and do that. And it runs the test again, and we have all hearts again. So that is fantastic news.
All right, I'm gonna run this game for a little bit. I don't need to keep you all here. I'm just gonna run it, go through. I usually like to play it for a while and just kind of test it to make sure everything is indeed working. And as I'm doing that, I'll run that self-test through a few times just to make sure that everything is good. After the Dreamcast has been running for a while, it's heating up a little bit. I'll periodically run that self-test after playing the game for maybe an hour or so. And it also is a pretty good excuse for me to just play one of my favorite games. So I'm going to do that real quick. We'll keep you all on here, and then here in a second, or here in a bit, maybe an hour, 2 hours, 14 hours. I don't know. We'll come back and we'll piece this thing all back together, make it more permanent, and we'll be good to go. All right, guys. Well, everything's looking good with it. I've been running this game for a little while now. I'm back at the title screen now, but after running the self-test several times in several different areas of the game, I've gotten all hearts, so everything is good to go with that. So we're actually ready to put this thing back together. So I'm going to go ahead and unhook it now, unhook it from the HDMI, the power, and all that stuff. Take the disc out, we'll piece this thing all back together and get it back in one piece.
Okay, let's go ahead and start with the controller port screws here. So this power cable wire actually has to run underneath the power supply. So it actually runs underneath this plastic shielding down around like this, and then it pops up on the other side here. So now that we're officially putting this thing back together, I'm just going to route it in the correct way. Nice. Switch my bit out so I can put in these tiny little screws for the fan. I like the magnetic bit for these, so I don't drop it down into the case. Okay, and one more. Remember the really small screws, the only tiny little screws for the entire console, go to the fan. And then we've got these smaller silver screws, which I'm going to switch my bit back. Didn't seem to want to go in right at the immediately. There we go. Alright guys, that's pretty much it. I'm going to take this tape off here. Just had this taped down so the console would think the lid was closed. So we can take that off now. Go ahead and put the top back on, we'll get this thing all back together. That. We'll go ahead and unplug the HDMI cable from the back. Flip this thing over. And here again you can see where I put those two screws there. Those are actually the two screws that are holding the DCDigital PCB in place. So they do go all the way through the case, just like what I talked about before, just to give you kind of a more visual idea of exactly what it looks like on the opposite side. Beautiful. Let's just put the modem back in, and this thing will be complete, good to go.
Well, guys, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. This has been a fun project. I love installing these things. It's like a little challenge, but it's a fun challenge. It's great. And then, of course, the best part is always testing them. So thank you for hanging out with me. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I will read every comment that I can and help in any way that I possibly can. Little disclaimer, I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to any of this stuff, so if you have any constructive criticism, things that you want to give to me, like, hey, I noticed you did this and you probably shouldn't have done it that way, by all means, let me know. I'm always looking to improve. So again, if you have some feedback for me that you want to give me, totally cool. Leave it in the comments below. Just the only thing that I ask is that you be a little respectful when you do it. Again, I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Thank you for checking out Fix It Retro, my brand new page, my brand new channel. I really appreciate it, guys. And hopefully we'll see you soon. See you later.